Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are back and we are going to be doing a recap talking about one of the tournaments that I competed in from a very long time ago. Now, even though people are familiar with all the tournaments that I've competed in recent times, competing at the top against Magnus, Fabiano, and the likes of everybody else, there are, as always, some very critical tournaments and moments throughout my career which impacted where I'm at today. Now, we're going to be going into the Wayback Machine, all the way back to the year 2006, and the tournament in question is the National Chess Congress, which was a tournament held in Philadelphia over the Thanksgiving holiday in November. So, nobody, of course, is thinking about this tournament, probably thinking, what was this event, why was it important, everything else. So to give you guys the backstory and all the lore behind why this tournament was so critical to me being where I'm at today, in August of 2006, I effectively decided that I was not going to pursue chess full-time as a profession. Very specifically, in April of 2005, about a little over a year and a half earlier, I reached 2664. I was right around the top 100 players in the world, but in the following year, I was unable to improve my ranking, and by August of 2006, my rating had settled at 2640 FIDE. So my rating had gone down a little bit. I had really struggled to improve, and I basically felt burned out from playing chess. So what did I do? I obviously decided that I was going to go to college instead and try to get a more respectable profession, or to obtain a degree, I should say. So I decided I was going to go to school. I ended up going to Dickinson College starting in August of 2006. Now, there is a common saying that the grass is always greener on the other side, meaning that when you're in your current situation, you always think there's something out there that's better. So, for example, if you're in a job and you're unhappy with your job, you might be thinking, well, maybe there's a new startup, maybe there's something else I could do that would be more attractive, more exciting, and so forth. Oftentimes, I found that this is simply not true. So when we come back to my story about the grass is greener on the other side, having spent my entire life in chess, being around everybody who played chess all the time, talked about chess, they were living, eating, sleeping, breathing chess 24/7, I was starting to wonder if there was something else out there. Now, additionally, I was at the age of 17. I was towards the end of my teen years, but I was curious if there were other things that could be more exciting than chess. So I decided that I was burned out. I decided to go to college, and I was expecting it to be a world that I enjoyed a lot more. Ultimately, that's not how it would turn out. One of the things that I found very disheartening about going to college is, in a sense, that certain people are more important than others. Very specifically, if you're in your third or fourth year of college, generally you have more prominence, you have more cachet, whatever word I want to use to describe it. You are a little bit more important than someone who is, say, a freshman or a sophomore in their first or second year. Now, maybe it's not like this in Europe, so I don't want to actually slam the door on everybody who's watching this video and they're from another part of the world, but in the US, at least, that's how I perceived it to be. Now, this is very different in the world of chess. Very specifically, if you are, say, an 8-year-old kid or 10-year-old kid and you play against someone who's, say, 60 years old, there is a common understanding and a respect between the players. You can talk to them about the game, and that is something that is just very unique to chess. If I were to even expand further upon it, one of the things that really has amazed me over the years, is having spent a lot of time in St. Louis, Missouri, is that you have Rex Singfield, who's a very prominent benefactor of the great game of chess in the United States. And many times I've seen him playing against a little kid who's like 10 or 11 years old. They're a better player than him. He has a great time playing them. And it's a really fun experience for everybody involved. But again, in no world or in no other field can I think of a situation where you have someone who's a billionaire playing against a kid and they're talking, they're communicating. You would never have that sort of interaction the way that you do in chess. So obviously, with all this stuff, I wasn't thrilled with college. I didn't really find the course that I was doing to be particularly exciting. I actually spent many evenings playing a lot of poker on the site PokerStars at the time. But the one thing that I was not doing was I was simply not spending time on chess. I was not playing it. I wasn't studying, wasn't doing anything. There might have been one or two rinky-dinky little Mickey Mouse type tournaments online that I competed in, but it was nothing serious. But as we fast forward from August to November of 2006, with me being a little bit unhappy with the whole situation at college, I realized there was this tournament being played in Philadelphia, about an hour and a half or 2 hours away by driving from where I was going to school. And I thought, why not play in this National Chess Congress tournament? It's a 6-game tournament. It's over Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the long Thanksgiving weekend. Why not give it a whirl and see what happens? So I ended up going to compete in this tournament. My stepfather was there with me, and let's talk about the tournament itself. Now, in the tournament, in the first couple of games, I was playing players around 2300 level, master players. I won those games very, very convincingly. And in the fourth round, I won a very big game against Grandmaster Alexander Ivanov from Massachusetts. Now, this one was very important because when I won the fourth round game, this put me in a situation where now I realized that even if I was a little bit rusty from having not studied or played chess, I could compete against the best players in the tournament, and I had a legit chance at winning. So I won the game against Ivanov. I was on 4 out of 4, and we're going to pick it up with the fifth round game where I'm playing with the white pieces against Grandmaster Leonid Yudasin. Now, Yudasin is a Grandmaster originally from Israel. At one point, he was in the top 10 in the world. He eventually immigrated to the United States, and I played against him many times as a kid at the Marshall Chess Club. Now, Yudasin was a player who gave me fits. I sometimes won some games against him. It was a very up and even, back and forth score. Just a very, very dangerous opponent to play against. Obviously, with his experience, it should not come as a huge surprise. So we're playing in this National Chess Congress in the fifth round, and in this game, I have the white pieces, and we're both on a score of 4 out of 4. So I played the move e4. Yudasin plays c5, knight f3, and now he plays the move e6. Now, many of our legendary encounters at the Marshall Chess Club, Yudasin would almost always play the classic Najdorf defense, but this time against me, he decides to play the move e6. So here I play the move d4, we get the trade, a6, I play the move bishop d3, and now we get the move bishop c5. Here I play knight b3, and Yudasin plays the move bishop to e7. Now, this is the first move that was a little bit surprising to me. I was expecting him to play the move bishop a7, but one thing that I think people who watch this recap are going to be interested in, besides all the storytelling, is how preparation worked when we go back 15-20 years. So again, in this tournament, with the pairings being posted 15-20 minutes before the game, you don't have a lot of time to prep. Obviously, I wasn't seriously in chess at the time, wasn't studying, so you want to have just a general idea of what you're going to do. Now, bishop to a7 was actually something I was very familiar with because only about a year and a half prior to that, I had actually faced this in the famous 2005 US Championship. Note, I said year and a half ago because it was called the 2005 US Championship, but it was played in 2004 in December. So, in the US Championship, the 2005 quote-unquote US Championship, I actually tied for first place with Grandmaster Alexander Shapunsky, also from New York. And as we tied for first place, we had a classic rapid playoff. Now, in that playoff, Shapunsky actually played this move bishop to a7 against me. I decided to castle. We got knight c6, knight c3, d6, queen e2, knight e7, bishop to e3. Shapunsky played b5. I traded. I played queen to e3, castles a4, b4, knight to e2. And after rook to d7, I believe I played the move a5, fixing this weak pawn on a6. Eventually, I would go on to win this game. And with it, I would then, I think, win the second tiebreaker game as well to become the 2005 US champion and win the prestigious tournament for the first of my 5 titles. So again, my preparation was basically I had played against this variation 1 year earlier. I had a general idea of how that game went, and I was just going to roll with the flow. Nowadays, of course, if I were actually going into game, I would be very, very heavily prepared against this setup, and I might play queen g4, might play queen e2, but it would be much more complex than simply having a basic idea from a previous game that I had competed in. So instead, Yudasin plays bishop e7. Here I play f4, d6, and now I play the move bishop e3. Now again, I had not prepared for this bishop e7 move before the game, but one of the things that I did a lot of at this time, whether it was between, say, 2000 and 2006, is I would look at the games of the world-class grandmasters and see what they were playing. So very specifically, there was one game in my mind at the time against this setup that I recalled, which was a game played by the famous 5-time world champion Vishy Anand from India. Now, very specifically, the setup with bishop e3 and knight e2 was played by Anand in a game in 2003, and it's a very flexible setup here because white wants to go queen to e2 or queen to f3 and castle the king to the queen side, and white wants to simply push the p on the king side. g4, g5, f5, very easy, free-flowing, and it's based off a simple concept. So I did recall this game, and I was really happy to reach this position. So we get knight d7. Now, in the game I just mentioned between Anand and Markowski from 2003, the move b6 was played. Vishy played queen e2, bishop b7, castles, queen c7, and then Anand would play g4 with the idea of g5 and f5, and he would win a very, very nice game. So this was the extent of my knowledge and preparation. Was I knew what Vishy did, trying to push the p on the king side. You want to get a position, you just want to play and simply outcalculate your opponent. So Yudasin plays knight d7. I go g4 here, we get h6, and now I play the move queen to e2, intending to castle my king out of the center. Yudasin plays queen c7, I castle, and now we get the move g5 being played. Now this move is a big mistake from Yudasin, but one thing that I want to highlight is that at this time, many of the tournaments that Leonid Yudasin was playing in were game 30 events. Now you're probably wondering, what does that have to do with anything? This tournament of course featured a classical time control. I believe it was 40 moves in 2 hours, followed by sudden death 1 hour if I'm not mistaken. But when you're playing a quicker game, you generally react quicker. You're a little bit less patient in terms of looking for ideas, and I think Yudasin also was simply afraid of me pushing my p here to g5. So say black goes b5 here. White can maybe go g5, takes. Say you go like knight g8 here. White can play h4, knight e5, and maybe some h5, g6 here. And black's pieces are very, very passive. So this g5 move in the position kind of reeks of desperation in a sense, but it still is an idea that you will see very frequently in certain Sicilians. So I take the pawn. He goes knight e5, and now I play the move rook g to g1, trying to guard this pawn on g4 from being captured. Yudasin plays bishop d7, and now I play the move king to b1. Yudasin plays rook c8, and here I play the move pawn to h3, guarding the pawn on g4. Now we get the move bishop to c6, and here I play the move bishop to f4. Now, obviously in this position, I'm up a pawn on the queen side. I have this extra c2 pawn, or you could say I have an extra outside h pawn. Either way, the main issue that I have here is that I'm worried that at some point black is going to start attacking on the queen side. Black has this great bastion knight on e5 that cannot be easily removed. If I could put a pawn here, so say I could get how do I do this? I guess I'll just make some random moves to illustrate the point. If I could somehow get a pawn to d4, I can remove this knight. Same would apply to f4. If I can get a pawn here, I can kick the knight. But currently in this position, I can't get a pawn to kick the knight out of e5. So black wants to attack. Black is this great knight. Additionally, the black king is very safe behind these central pawns here. I have no way really to open up any of these files. So I go for the move bishop to f4. Yudasin plays knight d7, and now I play the move pawn to g5. Now, if I'm a little bit careless here, say I play a move like a3, if black can start to get this bishop on the diagonal here, as well as bishop to a4, for example, you'll notice that even though the computer says white is still winning, it starts to look very scary from a human perspective with all these pieces barreling down towards the white king. So I go g5, stopping bishop f6. Also, I might want to push like h4, h5, g6 at some point. So it's a multi-purpose move in this situation. We get bishop to a4. I play knight to f3 here, trying to open up the second rank for the queen. For example, say I play h4 and takes. Here, black will have queen to c2. So when I go knight to f3, if black takes and I take, now I'm simply covering the second rank with my queen. So we get knight takes bishop. Here I take with the queen, and now we get the move queen to c4. Now, one of the drawbacks here for me having taken with the queen versus the pawn is that now this pawn on e4 can potentially become a big weakness. We get queen c4, I trade, and now I go knight to d4 here, trying to stop black from winning the pawn. Here Yudasin plays bishop c6. You're probably thinking, can't black go e5 here to simply fork the bishop and the knight? If black were to play e5, now I can play b3, forking the rook and the bishop here. So we have dual forks here from the pawns on from these two pawns here. Both pawns are forking something. If black plays rook c5, for example, I can move my bishop back. Black takes, I can take, and here I remain up one pawn, but we both have these double pawns on these files, but white should have an advantage in the endgame. So I go knight to d4. Yudasin plays bishop c6, trying to hit the pawn, and now I play the move rook to e1. Here we get the move e5. If black were to play, I'm trying to look for another move. If black actually really doesn't have any great moves, you go rook to h5, I can always take the bishop. So black doesn't really have much to do. We get e5, I take the bishop, he takes, and now I drop my bishop back to c1. Here Yudasin plays knight c5, trying to hit this pawn on e4. I play knight d2, guarding the pawn, attacking the rook, rook b4, and now I play the move h4, guarding the pawn on g5. So here all the pawns are guarded. Yudasin goes king to d7, and now I play c3, rook b8, and here I play the move king to c2. Now I'm hoping to maybe push these pawns on the queen side, maybe move the knight around. Also, if I don't push this pawn, I can never really move the knight because I simply hang this pawn. So it's a way to kick the rook back. Now I'm free to move the knight, maybe push the pawns, and it looks like all roads should lead towards a victory. Now, the funny thing about this position is it feels to me, as even looking at this game now many years later, like I've improved my position, but the computer actually says that white's advantage has gone down significantly here. And I guess that's because computer wants the idea of b3 to either fianchetto the bishop or put the bishop on a3 here. But c3 looks very logical, and I'm actually not convinced that I wouldn't play that in a modern game today. So we get this position, king e6, I play knight to c4 here, and now we get to move rook to h5. When I went knight c4, one of the big reasons here is that if I were to play a move like b3, maybe at some point black can play d5 and build the classic big black center. So I go knight c4. If d5, I can simply take the free pawn, rook guards the knight, and I win the game. So we get rook to h5. Black wants to go rook to h8 and target these two pawns on the edge of the board. Here I play b4, knight e7, and now I play the move knight to e3, rerouting this pony towards the very famous f5 square. Once the knight gets bashed on f5 here, black is in a world of hurt. So Yudasin plays a5. I go knight to f5 here, threatening to fork the king and the rook, and here we get the move bishop to f8. Now I take this pawn, we get rook to a8, and here I play the move bishop to a3, trying to target this pawn in the center of the board. Now here Yudasin plays c5. If black were to capture the pawn, this is a very obvious looking move. This would be a losing move because I can sack the bishop by taking the pawn. If black takes, there's knight g7, spaghetti time. I take the rook, and after rook a2, king d1, and knight g7, followed by knight to f5, I simply can start pushing my p up the board, and I will win the game. So Yudasin goes c5 here, trying to stop the trick, and now I play the move bishop to c1. He takes, and here I play the move pawn to a3, guarding the pawn with the bishop. Yudasin plays d5, and now I go knight to g3, attacking the rook, not taking, of course, because then I would hang the knight and lose the game. So I go knight g3. We get rook h8. I take, he takes, and now I play h5 here. And with these pawns rolling up on the g and the h file, combined with the weak f7 pawn, the open d file, the two towers and the pawns are simply too much to deal with. So we get the move rook to a4. I play rook hf1, targeting the pawn on f7. Yudasin goes king e6, and now I play the move h6, reinforcing these two pawns on the dark squares. We get rook to g4. I play knight to h5, and now Yudasin plays the move c4, trying to open up the diagonal, maybe to bring the knight into the game as well, but it's simply too little too late. I play the move knight to f4, we get king to d6 here, and now I check, king c6, and here I play the move knight to d5. The rook guards the knight, the pawn on f7 is under attack, knight can go to e3 or b4, and black's position is completely busted. Yudasin makes a check, I draw back, he moves the knight, and now I take the pawn on f7. We get to move knight to e4 here. Apparently rook to f6 is stronger, but I didn't really see a reason this isn't good. We get knight to e4 here, and now I play rook c7. Now you're noticing probably computer says after knight to d3, white's advantage has diminished a little bit. I think my intention after knight to d3 was simply to play this move knight to e3, forking the rook and the pawn here, and after black takes, taking the pawn on c4, and after takes, I think I thought this endgame was probably winning, although maybe there's something better here. Maybe rook df1 is better. It's still a little bit murky. I actually, of course, don't remember what I was planning, as this game was 20 years ago, but I assume I had some idea about what I wanted to play. Instead, Yudasin plays knight to e4. Now I go rook c7, checking the king. We get king b5, and now I play the very nasty move pawn to a4, checking the king again. Now here Yudasin goes king to a6. If he were to go king a5 after rook a7, this is simply checkmate. King has no squares available, it's just stuck on the rip. If black takes a4, I take with check, I take the knight, and now with the bishop covering the square, even though the black king is very close to my king, the king is completely safe on b1. Let's say rook h7, sample line, I can just go rook d2. If black trades, I have an extra piece and all this p on the king side. Black goes rook g1, I can simply go rook b2, and somehow here there's probably a forced checkmate, but even if there isn't, I can just play something like rook to b5, checking the king. Black has to sack, and after rook c1 and takes, white simply is an extra rook, and the rest of the game will need no explanation. So Yudasin goes king a6. Now I play the move bishop to e3, and here Yudasin resigns the game because black will have to give up a lot of material to try and stop checkmate. If black plays a normal move like bishop d6, there's rook to a7. Bishop guards the rook, king can't come forward. It's GG, why not? If black plays a move like bishop c5 here, for example, I can take the bishop. If black goes check, I can check with knight b4, followed by rook to a7, checkmate. And if black takes the bishop here, I can simply take. And after rook to b8, I have knight to b4, checking the king. Pawn guards the knight here. And after the king goes back, I don't know, let's say a7, for example, I can take the pawn. With these two pawns rolling up the board, the rook's infiltrating on the 7th rank. Black simply has no way to salvage the game. So that is why Yudasin resigns the game after the move bishop to e3. And with that, I get a very, very big victory, and I move to a score of 5 out of 5. Now, as Yudasin was someone I had played against many, many times, someone that I had struggled against, this game actually felt surprisingly easy. even though I hadn't been an active chess player for quite a while at this point. So it's very, very confusing to win this game. Having won this game, I went into the final round with a score with 5 out of 5. And in the final round, I was playing against Grandmaster Zviad Azoria from Georgia. Now, Azoria was a player who really came into his own in 2005. He won the biggest prize money chess tournament in the United States up to that point, which was the HP Global Tournament in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I believe the grand prize, if I remember correctly, I think it was $50,000, maybe it was 100, I don't remember, but it was a very, very big event, and the biggest of its time. So Azoria from Georgia had come to the US, very, very strong player, considered one of the top players in the country at the time. And let's jump into the game. So we get g3. I play knight f6, bishop g2, and now I play the move pawn to d5. Now, I think I'd mentioned this before, but going to this final round, I have a half-point lead with the black pieces. So it's not like the tournament is wrapped up. I still have some business to take care of. We get knight f3. I play c6, castles, and now I play the move bishop to g4. Azoria goes c4. I play e6. We get takes. I take with the e pawn here. If you were to take with a c pawn on d5, for example, I believe that after the move queen to b3, white has a very tiny advantage. It's probably nothing special after takes, and queen d7, but it's much easier for white to play. Now, one of the funny things is this game was in 2006, but I believe that many years later, the move bishop takes f3 was considered the main line with takes or ed takes or cd5. I don't remember. But at the time, with no preparation going to this final game, I decided to take the pawn. We get the move h3. I play bishop h5. We get d3. And now I play the move bishop b7. Azoria goes queen b3. Here I play queen b6, trying to avoid hanging this pawn on b7. We get queen c2. I castle. And now we get the move knight c3. Here I play the move knight to a6, and Azoria plays the move pawn to a3. Now, obviously in this game, I can't remember the specifics, of course, but I'm almost certain that this exact variation I play with d5, c6, and e6 was simply something that I decided to wing and play on the fly. So we get the move a3. Here I take the knight here. I think the reason I took the knight here versus playing like knight c5 is probably I was kind of worried about something happening in the center of the board. Maybe also worried about bishop to e3, trying to pin this knight on c5 here. So I decided to take the knight on f3. We get bishop takes bishop. I go knight c5 now. And here we get the move b4. Now, if white were to play bishop to e3, I believe that my intention was to play queen b3, offering the trade of the queens. Let's just say white trades. This would lose the game because I have d4 to fork the bishop and the knight in this position. And if white plays move like queen c1, I can go knight to e6, threatening d4 again to fork the bishop knight. Let's say white plays move like d4, for example. Now I can play rook to e8, followed by bishop d6. And it feels like in this position, both of these bishops are not very active. Bishops on a closed diagonal, bishops on a closed diagonal. Neither of these two pieces are particularly active. So b4 is played. I go knight to e6. Now I have a nice square for the knight to fork the queen and the bishop. And Azoria plays move bishop g2. Now, after bishop g2, I play the move a5 here, trying to open up the queen side here. I've got this nice bishop, nice rook, trying to create pressure immediately. Now, computer here actually thinks that after d4, knight e4, and knight d5, black is apparently a little bit better, but I decided why not play simple chess, just open it up. We get rook b1, takes, and now I play the move pawn to d4. Now, the reason I did this, I believe, during the game is after knight e4 in this position, I figured this pawn on b4 is much weaker. And clearly, based on what I played, had I played this, my intention was always to take the knight. But here, if I were to trade, now the pawns are very compact. If I go a5 here, I think after takes and a4, there are going to be some problems here on the queen side, and white actually is marginally better. So I get this position, and I take the knight. Knight to d5, I think here is bad because there's knight c5. Apparently, it's still equal, but I decided to trade the knights. Now I play the move knight c7, and I want to say that this move is really the hero move of the game because I've rotated this knight all over the board. If we go back, I went knight a6, knight c5, knight e6, knight c7, and now I'm going to go knight b5. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, and the goal is to put the knight on b5 where it's a very, very actively bastioned knight. Very specifically, in this position, say I were to play h6, white can potentially play a move like b5 down the road to try and open up this diagonal and open up these files. And when I go knight to c7, I stop the pawn thrust because I'm going to put the knight here, but it also creates this permanent weakness of the pawn. So say we get king h1 and knight b5 here. Pawn is blockaded. So this bishop is always spying this weak pawn, so you can't get rid of the weakness. Additionally, with the knight on b5, I now have access to both c3 and a3. So really, this great knight has access to multiple squares. There's a weak pawn, and white can't open up this diagonal for the light square b. So I go knight c7. Azoria plays bishop d2. I go rook to a6 here. Knight b5, of course, is fine as well, but I figured by playing rook a6, I have time to go for the double stack, infiltrate with the kebab, and I can always put the knight on b5 later. Azoria plays e3, and now I play the move knight to b5 because very specifically, I threaten knight a3, but if white ever takes the pawn on d4, now I can always potentially take with the knight here and get this great bastion pony on d4 as well. So multiple ideas behind knight b5, and Azoria does ultimately take this pawn. Now, Azoria could have played the move rook to a1, which is what I would have expected, but after rook to a8, rook takes a6, rook takes a6 here, black is doing very well. There's a weak pawn on d4. I control this open a file. The queen and the knight are aiming towards the center as well. All of black's pieces have harmony, and here you'll notice the bishop. No scope on this diagonal, pawns in the way, so no real scope here. This bishop is walled in by the pawns, so terribly passive. Bishops on d2 and e4, queen's not super active, and black is better. So Azoria decides to take the pawn, and here I play the move knight to a3, queen b3, and I take the rook on b1. Azoria takes, and what Azoria is hoping here is that even though he sacrificed a rook for a bishop, that both these bishops are now going to become very active. Specifically, white is going to play d5 or b5 and open up all the diagonals for this light square bishop that's on the central square. So I decide to take. Azoria plays bishop to e3, I drop the queen back, and now he plays the move king g2, trying to guard the pawn on h3. Now, white could have played the move b5 here as well. I assume the reason Azoria did not do this is he figured after rook to a3, say queen c4 here, I can always take the pawn on h3 and we would reach some position like this, where with the rook for the bishop, but the 3 pawns versus 2 on the king side, Azoria probably figured this was a losing endgame in the long run. So he goes king g2. I play b5 here, trying to stop the push and permanently fixing this weak pawn on b4. Azoria plays rook c1, I go rook c8, we get d4, and now I play the move rook to a4, trying to target the pawn on b4. Now, this move is a mistake. What I probably should have played here was the move h6 or maybe g6. Both moves are playable, but it's very difficult here because if I play h6, I'm always a little bit worried about the light square diagonal. Say white goes something like queen c2, now there's a threat of bishop to f5, there's a threat of d5, and optically it just feels kind of scary. Maybe queen b1 is the best one, because I guess here you can actually take, and there's a check, and then you can move the queen back, and black is winning the game. But this feels a little bit awkward because if white ever does get this position, if I ever push the g pawn, I lose this one. So there are all these weaknesses on the diagonals, and it just doesn't feel quite right. Now, g6 actually is a move that I also figure makes some sense, but if I go g6, now in the long run here, there might be some dark square weaknesses around my king as well. At any rate, I play rook a4. Azoria plays queen c2. Now there's a double A battery hitting both the pawns. There's also the threat of bishop to f5 as well. So I go g6 here, stopping the threat towards the pawn, stopping bishop f5 as well, and now we get the move bishop takes c6. Here I play queen d8, Azoria plays d5, I take the pawn, and now he plays move queen d3. Now again, you're probably looking at this position thinking, well, I mean, you've got a rook for bishop, same number of pawns, should be winning. But the problem here is that white has this very active d pawn that can roll up the board here. This bishop kind of dominates this rook. If I take, white will obviously take the rook. If I go here, you lose. This rook is very passively dominated by this bishop. There's really no scope available. This rook on b4 also is not a great piece. And the pawn on b5 can't really advance at the moment because the rook is in the way. So when you combine all these positional factors here, even though black should be much better, it's not an easy position to convert. So I go bishop g5, trying to trade off a set of the bishops here, and Azoria plays the move rook e1. I trade the bishops, he takes, and now there's a threat of rook to e8 in this position. Here I go queen to b6, we get queen to e2, and now I play the move queen to d4. Azoria plays queen to f3, and now I play the move king to g7, trying to improve the position. Azoria goes rook to e7, and now I play the move queen to f6. Now, this move is still good. Computer prefers rook f8 very marginally, but I figure with queen f6, I offer the trade of the queens, I target the rook, and any endgame, I should be happy. So we get queen to e3, Azoria guards the rook, and now I play the move rook to b2. Now here, computer actually wants rook to c4, which is a very tough move to play because it looks like it simply hangs the pawn on b5. But after rook to c3 and the move queen to e5, there's a very nice move rook 3 to c5 here, and this is a bit of geometry, because I'm attacking the bishop here, and if white goes bishop c6, I can sack the rook with rook takes bishop. If white takes, you lose the queen, and if white trades the queen, I can take with the rook here, and I'm winning the game. Now, if white were to say move the bishop to, I don't know, let's say e2, for example, I can simply trade the queens here. And now I can play the move king to f6. If the rook goes, I take the pawn. And objectively, with 3v3 on the king side here and the ability to stack the rooks, this should be winning. The rook should be worth more than the bishop. And if white plays f4 to guard the rook here, I can now play the move rook d8, bishop f3, rook c2. If white blocks, I trade, and this is winning. And if white goes for the move king g1, now I can play the move rook to b8. And with the classic ladder threats of the checkmate, white will have to go rook e1. And after rook to b3, rook to f1 guarding the bishop, now I can simply bring this king back around to guard the pawn. And white is kind of paralyzed in this position. You can never move the bishop because you hang the pawn. You never move the rook without losing the bishop. You offer the trade. This should always be winning. So white's position is simply terrible. With the king cut off, the two rooks so active here, black should win this game basically 100% of the time. But I do believe that at this point, time is getting a little bit low on the clock. So I played the move rook to b2 instead. And now we get the move rook to e4, threatening rook to f4. And this could be very dicey here. Say I play a move like h5, you get rook to f4. It's suddenly the spaghetti-o moment because my queen cannot stay on this diagonal. If I move the queen to any of these squares, white will capture the queen. And if I go away, white has queen to d4 check, hitting the king and the rook. Once I lose the rook, I lose the game. So it's getting a little bit dicey here. I end up playing this move b4 here, which is a mistake. Because after rook to f4, now at this point, I end up having to sack the rook. Now, if I were to play queen c3, which is a move where the queen is guarded by the pawn, white has to move queen to e7 here. And you're probably thinking, well, what's the big deal? Rook to f8, guard the pawn, right? Should be okay. Well, it's not okay because white can go bishop to e8 here. And suddenly the pawn on f7 is going to collapse. And as you guys can tell from the evaluation bar, white is going to win the game. A sample line would be something like b3, for example. And white will simply take with the bishop here. And black just loses. If you move the king, you lose the rook. Either way, you can't move the king. If you move the rook to, say, b8 here, white can play bishop to e8. If you go to the back rank, it's always the same thing. It's a checkmate. And if you go king to h6, there's rook h4, checkmating the king as there are no squares available. If I were to play rook f7, same thing. White takes, same checkmate. I guess this is a little bit different with queen to h4. Either way, it is GG, why not? So when this occurs on the board, I now have to sack the rook with rook takes bishop. If white were to take the queen after rook takes rook here, black is actually winning due to the power of the two towers with this classic 90-degree right triangle. If white plays queen d4, you can simply take the pawn. If white takes, the black king stops the white pawn, and the black king gets over. Black pawn queens, GG as well. So therefore, Azoria takes the rook. I take back, checking the king. We get queen to f3, and now I have to regrettably trade the queens. If I were to move the queen back to, say, c7, for example here, now white can play queen to d5 with this threat of queen d4, the threat towards the pawn on f7 here. If anybody's better, it probably is white. So I end up trading the queens, but now after king takes queen, we're in a rook and pawn endgame. Yes, I have an extra pawn on b4, but this rook on f4 is super placed here, and the game should end in a draw. So I play the move rook to b1. We get g4, I go b3, we get h4, and now I play the move rook c1. We get rook b4, rook c3. Of course, white has to go rook b4. If you play a move like g5 after b2, the rook escorts the pawn up the board. You queen, take the tower, easy peasy lemon squeezy. Whoops, didn't mean to go forward that far. Sorry, you guys. So we get this position after, where was I? Right here, we get to move rook to b4, attacking the pawn. I play check, king to e4, and now I play the move h6. Azoria goes rook b6 here, trying to cut my king off from getting close to the pawn, and now I play the move king to f8. Here, Azoria plays h5, I go g5, and now we get to move rook to b4. Now here I play the move rook to c2. Perhaps a better try would have been to play the move king to e7, but nonetheless, this position still should be a draw after this move pawn to f4. If I play a move like rook g3, white can simply make the check. I guess king to f6, check, king g7. And now white can play this very awkward move f5, and after rook g3, f6. In this position with rook b7, the game will end in a draw as white can win this pawn on f7, or I'm going to have to make a ton of checks. Of course, one of the things I will also point out that's amusing is that when I look at this game, this game is actually from my personal database. I do not believe that this game exists anywhere out there online. And in my personal database, I actually have king to e7. And I mentioned that rook to b6, king to d7, king d4, rook f3, king c4, and king c7 is actually winning by force. Now, this also speaks to how much weaker engines were at the time, because when I give this line that's winning for black in my personal analysis, obviously, as I just mentioned, f4 would be good enough for a draw, but the line I had with rook to b6 would be losing. So at the time, I actually thought I was still winning the game here, but as we can tell, it was theoretically a draw. But I played rook c2 instead, and after rook to c2 and the move f4, now the game is effectively a dead draw. I play the move rook to f2 here. I could have tried the move pawn to b2, hoping for a little sneaky trick, where if white takes the pawn, I can sack the rook with rook to c4, checking the king. If white moves the king, I take the rook and win. And if you take the rook, I queen the pawn, and with a queen for a rook, black should be winning the game. But if I do play b2, white can flick in this check here, hitting the king. And now white can take. I still could make a check, but after king to f3, the rook is still spying the pawn. And after check, I guess white should probably go king to f4 here. If I ever go rook c2 to guard the pawn, white is simply going to draw this game very easily on the king side with the 2 versus 1, so that won't work. And that's why I did not play b2. Instead, I go rook to f2. Azoria takes the pawn, I take, and now he takes the pawn, I check, he goes king to e5, and here I play the move king to g7. Now, if I were to take this pawn on g4, after the move king to f6, the game ends in a draw here. If I am sloppy and play rook g1, there's rook b8, checkmating the black king, no escape square. If I go rook f4, white takes, 1v1, easy draw. And if I go king to g8 here, white can play the move rook to b5, winning the pawn on g5. If I go king h7, let's say we get takes, 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 simply 1v1, game will end peacefully. So I go king g7, trying to keep an eye on this pawn on g4 and cut off this white king from entering. Azoria plays rook g3, guarding the pawn, and now I play the move f6. We get king e6, check, king d5, not king f5, by the way, because rook to e5 would be checkmate. King has no escape square, and white loses the game. We get king d5, I check, king d4, rook e1, and now Azoria plays move king d3. Here I go f5, we get takes, king f6, and after the move rook to e3, I effectively agreed to a draw. Now, I don't know why I have the wrong result here. This actually, it says black wins. This was actually a draw. I don't know why. I don't know why the PGN file is glitched. Anyway, after rook to e3, the game ends in a draw. Now here, the reason the game ended in a draw is that if I trade the rooks and we reach this end game here, white pushes, no piece on the board. And if I were to move the rook to say h1, white has many ways to draw, but probably the simplest is just to bring the king back. We reach some endgame like this, and this is known as a theoretical draw. Even though I have one extra pawn, the white rook can always check from the side or come back to the back rank and check the king from behind. So after rook to e3, the game ends in a draw. Now, with this result, I was obviously very satisfied from a tournament standpoint. I scored 5.5 points out of 6. I won very convincingly. As you see in this game, as well as the previous one, I had great chances to win the game. Even though this ultimately ended peacefully, I was always on the right side of this match. So this gave me a big boost of confidence because both Yudasin and Azoria were players at the time I felt were on par with me, and even though I had not been studying chess for the previous 6 months, I was able to get great positions and simply outplay them and win this tournament. So what did this mean for my chess career, and why am I doing this video? Once I won this tournament, in my mind, or in my view, this is very much a sign that it was time to take a shot at chess once again, because I had been unhappy with college, everything that was going on. Obviously, I'd gone there to take a break from chess, but the fact that I was able to dominate this tournament, coming into this with no preparation and just playing chess and just enjoying the moment, really signified that it was time to return to the game. So at the end of the first semester in December of 2006, I ultimately would leave Dickinson College, and I decided that I was going to come back to chess. Now, the first tournament back in January of 2007, I believe it was, that I played was this Barcelona Casino tournament. It was, of course, held in Spain. I won this tournament very convincingly, and there were quite a few players over 2,600, and this really signified my return and my pursuit of a full-time career as a chess professional. Now, I would not really look back from this tournament. This tournament was the last tournament I would play before I pursued chess full time. And had it not gone the way that it did with this great result, there's a very good chance that I ultimately would have stayed in college and I would have suffered through it. Who knows where I would be today, but I almost certainly would not be a professional chess player, and I definitely would not be making this recap. So just a bit of lore, another long story, another ancient thing from the Wayback Machine. But I hope you guys enjoyed the story. You enjoyed the recap and everything associated with this tournament, and how all these little moments make a huge difference in history and where people end up. So on that note, I hope you guys enjoyed this recap. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with more great content in the very near future. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.